But hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Teach Middle East podcast. I have with me Dr. Nadia Lopez, and she's a friend of mine. So please, if this podcast goes east, west, north, and south, don't blame us. But we are talking self-care, how to take care of yourself as a teacher, someone who gives so much, gets so little, and has to really make a concerted effort to keep your cup full. Because you know what the adage says, you cannot pour from an empty cup. So we're going to dive into some of Nadia's self-care tips. We're going to talk about her journey to self-care, what made her take her self-care seriously at a point in her profession.
You are listening to the Teach Middle East podcast, connecting, developing, and empowering educators.
Welcome, Nadia.
Thank you. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, although I would love to be in person, but this works.
It's what we have until we get you here, you know.
Yeah.
We can't get you here fast enough, but we'll see what happens as, things are opening up. Let's just be hopeful.
Yes, absolutely.
So, for those who don't know Nadia, give us a brief intro.
I am a self-proclaimed education guru. And I say that because I opened a school in 2010 in New York City. It was a STEAM-focused school. I actually became a viral sensation through Humans of New York because one of my scholars spoke about the fact that I was his greatest influence, and I had the opportunity of traveling around the world, presenting a TED Talk, and that's entitled Why Open a School and to Close a Prison. I've also authored a book, The Bridge to Brilliance, and Teaching in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which I'm a co-author of with several Varkey ambassadors from the Global Teacher Prize. And I just love education. I love everything about it. I love the fact that it is a tool that can be used to liberate children and change the trajectory of their lives. But I also recognize that as educators, we're not often seen in the light that we should, although COVID did expose how important we are. I just think that after things started to open up, we went back to business as usual. And so I want to uplift the profession by always being a voice for what are some of the ills happening in education, but also speaking about what are some of the great things that are happening as well. And to, shed a light on those individuals who are doing outstanding and extraordinary work.
Yeah. And some of the work that you've been doing recently has come out of your experience as a school leader, as a teacher, someone on the front lines of the battle. Talk to me about your journey as a principal. What was that like? What were some of the ups and some of the challenges that you experienced?
So let me start with the ups because, we want to start from a happy place. So the ups for me was really the children. I got into this community of Brownsville that if you Google it, Brownsville, Brooklyn, the first thing you find is poverty, gangs, violence. It's everything negative. And so going into that community, that often pulsates, right? The hopelessness and the helplessness. But what I found is that there is a sense of resilience. They have their mantra is never ran, never will. And they stick by that. And so that tells you that these are folks who are going to fight to the very end, but they don't necessarily have the blueprint of what they need to fight for. And so for me, it was about, you don't have to live in these dire situations. Yes, your community is impoverished, but you do have an opportunity to advocate for what you need. Children should get what they deserve. And so creating a space where Black and Brown children were able to learn about their history, to be able to be treated with respect, to always be poured into and reminded that they were exceptional and they were brilliant. So I call them Brownsville Brilliance, because the situations and circumstances that they were dealing with essentially is exactly how diamonds are formed, right? All of that pressure, we turn that into what becomes diamonds, and that's who they are for me. I love the relationship that I had with my parents. They trusted me, even though some of them wanted to fight with me, but ultimately they understood that what I was doing was preparing their children for excellence and to be able to compete in the world, not just in their local neighborhood. And then finally getting a staff, because that took some time. So that transitions us to the challenges. To find individuals who really believed in children consistently. You know, as a new school, folks were so enamored by, oh, this is like, you call them scholars. We have a uniform. The colors in the building, we, had black and purple because it represents royalty. And I wanted the children to know that through education, they can ascend to a higher level of greatness. And that's who I believe them to be, and knowing their lineage. And so all of these things, people come in and feel like they don't have to work as hard. And it's like, no, you have to work 10 times harder, because it's not necessarily innate for them to believe this in themselves. So the work was hard, and finding the right people was extremely harder because, there's oftentimes educators get into rooms, and if you're not in there, there's things that are said to children that children themselves won't repeat and say that this person was causing harm in a space, or this person was demoralized, and they don't have the language. And sometimes they're just so used to people talking to them in a negative way that they think that that's normal behavior. So I had to do a lot of transitioning. I'll be very honest. I probably have transitioned maybe 20 to 24 people out of the school. And it wasn't like, if folks be like, oh my God, that's a lot. No, every space is not for everyone. And I always taught my team, because I want to say it's a teachable moment. This is not a plantation. You are not forced to be enslaved in a workspace. If you are not aligned to the vision, you do not have to stay. I don't want people to work for me who don't believe in my vision. I don't want people to work for me who don't believe in children. And I don't want people to work for me who are toxic and want to engage other people in negative thoughts and behaviors because they're miserable. No, that's not what I want. So, that was the challenge. The other challenge was even the very entity, which was the New York City Department of Education, who approved me to open up a school, wasn't actually supportive of a lot of the things that I was doing. So, they had a lot of policies that I felt were oppressive, that weren't progressive. We were so behind the times. So anything that was considered innovative, because it wasn't aligned to their lack of vision, because I want to say that there was no vision, because it wasn't aligned to anything and they didn't come up with it, it always seemed like it was a problem. So a lot of the things that we did it within our school. And then once we, whether it was being published or was coming to fruition, an event, and then they found out, it would just be like, oh, well, sorry. And I don't even want to say I apologize. I never asked for forgiveness. I wasn't asking for permission, because at the end of the day, I was doing what was needed for children, right? And as a career changer, what I recognize with the education system is it's not fully preparing our kids to go into the world, to think critically, to think about innovation. It's like very rote, right? We teach them to stay in a box because we need data to substantiate our progress. And so I'm like, this reading passage, yes, the children need to read, but it's actually not helping them. Like, it's not helping them to critically think and really have agency for themselves. So creating our own curriculum, doing things that were different, fighting against the system that was constantly, trying to figure out ways to sabotage me or penalize me or do all of these things, was an ongoing process. And my thing was, are children being harmed? No. Am I wasting money? No. Am I being egregious in terms of like being so disrespectful to the system? No. So why can't I do what I need to do? But I also understood that I was a Black woman in a system that's not being ran by people who look like me. And to liberate children meant that I wasn't creating a pipeline to prison, which was expected of the community that I was serving. So those were the challenges. And so showing up every day in my fullness meant that I was actually compromising myself at the same time. And that meant, was I taking care of myself in terms of exercise? Nope. I always had an excuse why I didn't want to exercise. Like, I was like, it just doesn't fit into my day. Was I engaging in any type of yoga meditation? No. I was resistant to yoga. I was like, what is this dog down? And I don't like this. And I don't want to do any of that. Meditation, my mind moves too much. I can't settle and I can't find quiet. Like I had an excuse for everything. The way I ate was, I didn't even eat half of the times. I go to work by 7. I was drinking iced coffee all day. And then I'd have a meal maybe at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And where we were located is a desert swamp where the food that's available isn't anything that anyone should be eating. So I also didn't want to eat that. So my food intake was not great. And one thing I did do, though, I would go to the doctor all the time. If there was something wrong, I believed in going to the doctor. But I was going to the doctor so frequently because I was developing various autoimmune diseases that was related to the stress from work.
Yeah.
So, that's the highs and lows.
It's interesting when you think about the fact that you're pouring so much into a community. And granted, they need a champion. We all need a champion. Like we all need somebody to take care of us. We all need somebody to believe in us. And you had such a big North Star that it is when you look at your North Star that you sometimes forget you.
Yeah.
And you forget that you as a human being need the care, you need the attention. So what manifested? What happened? What was the point at which you thought, oh my God, if I don't do something, then it's going to be too late?
Oh, I was already at too late. So what ended up happening was I had already developed one autoimmune disease, which is eosinophilic esophagitis. And you have these eosinophils in your system, which is white blood cells. But my system started to believe my esophagus was a foreign object and attacked my esophagus. And it was simply because I had really bad acid reflux. And after a while, the acid going into my esophagus made my esophagus seem like a foreign object. So needless to say, I would literally end up in the emergency room having to get liquid lidocaine to stop the peristalsis of my body. And when they did a biopsy, they diagnosed me and, it was stress related. So I had to take medication. I want to say almost 5 years. I was on this medication to just manage the acid reflux so that it wouldn't exacerbate. Like I wouldn't have these flare-ups. The second one was, which was the final one. And in between that, you have the migraines, you have the insomnia, you have the depression and the anxiety, all of these other things that happen. But physically, the second one happened. I actually went to a principal's meeting and I felt physically sick. Like everything that they were talking about, I was just like, my body is like repulsing this conversation. And my girlfriend, a good friend of mine, who's a principal as well, I said to her, I can't do this anymore. She was like, what do you mean? I was like, I can't do this. Like, I feel sick. Like they're talking and my body, I feel like it's rejecting everything that they're saying. And I ended up going to the bathroom. This may be too much information, but it's important for folks to know. And I noticed that my urine was brownish color as opposed to the regular clear or light yellow. And I was like, oh God, I need to drink water. But then I was like, I drank like a whole liter of water on my way here. So I go back into this meeting and I felt even more sick. So I go back and I noticed that the urine was now pink. And I was like, this just doesn't seem right. So I leave, I call my doctor, I get to the office and I explain to him what's going on. And he's like, okay, give me a sample of your urine. By the time I gave him a sample of my urine, it was bright red. And then he's like, I thought you said it was like a pink or like a light brown. And I was like, it was. I don't know what this is. So he gave me antibiotics and I was like, I don't think this is an infection. I don't have an infection. I don't think so. And he was like, just as a precautionary measure. But as the days were progressing, I felt weak. And I'm the type of person that I could keep going until the wheels come off. And I was shopping for my daughter for prom and I didn't even have the energy to do that. So clearly I was like, oh, I don't want to shop. There's something wrong. So I called the doctor and I was like, I don't want to shop. And he was like, Nadia. I said, no, there's something wrong. He says, okay, you need to go to the emergency room. But it was a holiday weekend. He was like, come to my office first. I go to his office first. And then he was like, nope, you got to go straight to the emergency room. I went to the emergency room. I actually picked up my daughter. We were there for 9 hours. And then they're telling me I had kidney stones. I was like, I have kidney stones. Like, this is not it. It literally required them to do a biopsy. Like it was back and forth with I had to go to the doctors. I had to go to a nephrologist. They could not figure out what was wrong with me. And then finally, after doing the biopsies, my cells still didn't indicate that there was something wrong. And I said to them, I don't know what you all need to do, but you need to retest those cells because something is wrong. And when they did that, they found that I had what's called Berger's syndrome, which is IgA nephropathy, which is a very rare disease for people of color to have. So essentially, I developed this because of stress. The stress on my kidneys by not going to the bathroom, not drinking water, not eating well, all of these things. I was put on prednisone, which is a steroid. And that was I don't even know how many months, but it was bad. I had such a bad reaction to it. And then the healthcare system they were terrible. The hospital that I went to, because I could not go to the city where I needed to go for better healthcare. They didn't give me a nutritionist. And there's certain things you should never eat when you're on steroids. So I started to show signs of diabetes being on steroids. So it was a whole thing. It forced me to have to change everything. Like it literally forced me to start taking accountability of my time, because when I looked at my calendar of what I was doing, nothing showed anything for Nadia. Everything showed work, travel, related to the Lopez Effect, book stuff. But it was just like, where's your time for you? So July of 2020, I had this planner. And every single day I would write all of the things that I was doing. And I was intentional about doing something that would provide me with like the feel-good moments. So self-care and learning something, because I couldn't remember the last time I actually read for the pleasure of reading and learning, but not for the pleasure of professional development, right? Like, and that's not even pleasurable half of the time. So I was like, let me start doing that. And I started to take a log of what I ate every single day. And so those were the things that, as a result of, being sick, that was the defining moment of this is it, because I recognized, which was hard, I had done this to myself, right? As much as the system had done this callously without any concern or regard for my own personal health, I had fallen into the cycle myself and not said at any time, I'm not doing this, right? And it also has to do with the location we work in, because there were other people who worked in other communities. Like there were a few people who worked in Central Park South area, in particular 2 white men that I went to visit their schools. And at 3:00, they were packing up. They were packing up their bags. And I looked at them. I was like, what are you doing? They were like, oh, the day is over. I'll be back tomorrow. And I said, I could never do this. And they were like, why not? And I was like, because my scholars are in my building until 6. I'm in classes all day. I don't get to emails. I don't get to write out observations. I don't get to think until after 6:00 when everyone has left the building. I said, so I leave my building at 11:00 at night. They were like, oh, absolutely not. That's not. Mm-mm. And if I had to stay, my assistant principal was here. I was like, what? So their mentality was different. How they were going to show up in their spaces was different. And they were allowed to do that, right? Because for me to leave, if my scholars didn't show a little bit of progress, the question was always like, well, what did you do? What didn't you do? Like all of these things. So I was so angry and I was disappointed. And then I became sad. I feel like I was going through a grief process because I started to think about my daughter and what I was teaching her, and the fact that I wasn't, as much as I was teaching about the liberation through education, I was also teaching them how you die for a position that would never mourn me leaving. And so I didn't want to die. Like that became my thing. I was like, I do not want to die. I don't want my daughter to bury me because I've sacrificed so much. And I definitely don't want my mother to bury me after she believed in the education system. Like, this is just not going to work. So that became the point of transition for me to start thinking about either how do I show up differently in the workspace, or how do I transition and pivot out of this space altogether?
And what did you choose to do?
honestly, COVID and the racial uprising that happened here in the States made the decision, on top of my doctor saying you have 3 options. If you do not do something radical in terms of how you conduct yourself, you will either need dialysis, a kidney transplant, or you will die an early death. And I was like, yeah, I can't do this anymore. Because I knew by going back into the school, I was on a medical leave for a year and a month from May 2019 all the way until I resigned July 1st, 2020. The system was very transparent about how they weren't prepared for this moment. And I know no one was prepared for COVID, but there were things that were blatantly unprepared for. And a lot of what I knew was going to happen was, well, the schools will figure it out. Like, we just need to get through this so the schools could figure it out. And I always said to people, a school is a building. It's the principal who has to figure it out, right? And so I knew that there was going to be an exceptional amount of accountability placed on me that I did not feel I would ever come out being either healthy or live through. And I also understood that they were so insensitive by not acknowledging the racial uprising that was happening, specifically when we were a school that one of our staff members' brother had been killed by the police the September before George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. So I was just like, even if y'all checked in, even if you said, how is your school community doing? Has anyone been affected? Do you need support? Just those simple questions, that never happened. So I was just like, I'm not doing this anymore. I can't. And so I resigned.
Yeah. I mean, good on you for choosing you. Really, no,
Yeah.
like it really is, it's what it is. Because being the person that you are, if you stayed, you would inevitably go back to giving more than you could afford to give. And that's the key thing there, right? Is to know that right now, I'm either going to choose to give all of me to the very end, to my death, or I'm going to walk away. And I think you chose the better part because you've already given. And at this point, you have to preserve a little bit for yourself. So for teachers listening to the pod who they're tired and burnt out and they need something, what kind of self-care tips can you offer them?
So first, I want to say to you, give yourself grace, right? You have to give yourself grace. And what I mean by that, everything starts with your mental capacity. You will do more damage mentally to your body physically than you would. And you don't even realize, like, stress shows up in many ways that become unexplainable diseases and disorders. And I know because I've dealt with 2 of them, of which I want to say, because I'm no longer in these stressful positions anymore, I'm in remission. I don't have any symptoms. I'm not on medication. I don't have any of that, right? So give yourself grace. The second thing I'm going to say is, which is important, is mental health equals therapy. So whether it's a therapist or even a coach, that could be a life coach, that could be a career coach, because sometimes the stress that's associated with your mental health is also because your frustration of where you're at in terms of your career and not knowing if there's options for something else for you to do, or figuring out ways in which you can manage the space that you're in. So you're not overexerting yourself, that you utilize strategies that will help you to not burn out. And you also need to be mindful of, is it burnout or is it that you're in an institution that goes against what you believe in and you're forcing yourself to do something that you don't want to and your body is responding to that thing? Because that's not burnout. That is literally your body, which is what I experienced, telling you, you can't do this. And so it shuts down little by little. So I want you to be mindful of that. The other thing I will say is, like I do, and I know it's a little bit considered time consuming, but write down what you do during the day. Be accountable for your time. See where you spend most of your time at, because sometimes we don't even recognize how we're overexerting ourselves in a particular area. So, you can break it down incrementally by hours or just overall in your day. And when you look at it, I'm a particular person who I use pens, different colors. So anything that's related to self-care is green. Anything that's related to me learning is like this light blue. And anything that was related to work was purple because that was the color of the schools. And the purples always outweighed everything else. And so I had to be intentional about saying, oh, I don't have any greens here today. Tomorrow is going to be a green day. Like, I'm going to be intentional about walking, about just doing Netflix and chill, about calling one of my girlfriends. I will take myself out to dinner now. Like, I'm good for that. Before I'd be like, oh, I don't want to be by myself. Oh, I like it. I love it. Right? So do those things for yourself. Walking is really important. I'm not a runner. Like, I'm not that girl. Do not expect me to be doing the 4K. No, I will walk and I give myself an hour. You don't necessarily have to do an hour, but for me, my peace of mind and my connection to God comes when I walk. So for an hour, I do 3 miles, or maybe 45 minutes, I do 3 miles. If not, I do like a low impact workout, which is like 30 minutes. And you can easily find those on YouTube. But you have to get out that energy. You don't realize, one, breathing is really important. Not like breathing just to inhale, exhale, oxygen and carbon dioxide. No. How you breathe is instrumental, because when you exhale, you let out a lot of toxins and negative energy. As an educator, you're in spaces with other people, and it's a lot of people. You don't know how much you are absorbing into your body. And so you have to be very cognizant of that. That's where meditation came for me, and yoga was important. So when I was on this thing about, I don't want to do dogwood down and all of these things, and I might be even saying that wrong, and forgive me to all the yogis, it's okay. Forgiveness, grace, hello. But what I want to say to you is, the minute I got sick and I could no longer be at work, I invested in yoga. And I'm going to tell you this, I used to do yoga at the school, but I would do yoga at 6:00 with my team in the evening because we were all there. I would do it from 6 to 7, and then I would go back to the computer and work on things. That's counterintuitive, because technically after you do yoga, there's like this release that happens that you're supposed to take it down. You can take a nap. You're supposed to, walk on the grass, whatever. For me to go back into doing work was so counterintuitive. So when I started doing my yoga sessions, I realized you go get your water, take a walk, get a healthy lunch if you want to, and then just sit and chill out. And I learned to breathe. I learned the importance of breathing. I had to go to meditation class and learn the importance of clearing your thoughts in your minds, because anything you think will permeate and it will manifest. So if you have negative thoughts, if your brain is moving too quickly, and we all have those moments, but you want to be intentional about slowing them down and being observant of what you're thinking about. Because sometimes you're obsessing about things that are actually standing in your way. So those things are really, really important. And who's your circle? I think it's also important for us to take inventory of the people in your circle. We may think we have a lot of people around us. I have a lot of family. I have a lot of friends. But when you're going through something, who do you actually call? Because most of the time, we stay in such isolation. We don't call anybody. Yet you'll have 100 people that you'll say are your closest friends and family. You need to actually take a list and an inventory to see, when you're on the ledge and you're going through something, who is the person that you can call? When you want to take a walk, who's the person that you can take a walk with? When you need to confide in someone, who's that person? If you need sound advice, who's that person, right? If you don't have those individuals, it's not about you beating yourself up. It's about saying to yourself, all of these other people that's part of the 100 are not feeding my soul, because guess what? You're probably the person who's the sole provider for them. So you need to be intentional about who's in your circle, who's going to feed you, who's going to allow you to grow, and who can be there for you so that you don't feel trapped and you don't feel that burnout. That's really important as well.
There's a lot in there. I think what I really liked was the fact that you invested. A lot of times we think these things are automatic. And as teachers, money is tight. We get that. But you have to make the investment, whether you're making that investment in a yoga coach, or you're going to make that investment in an actual coach, or you're going to make that investment in taking classes for meditation. So you have to make that investment. You know what teachers will do? We'll spend our money buying resources and books and all the stuff. But would we pay for a coach? Would we pay for a class? We don't. And that's where the problem is. It's that priority shift that we need to make in order to make sure that we are intentionally taking care of ourselves. So let's wrap it up. What are you doing nowadays? So for all the educators listening, where's Dr. Nadia? What's she doing? What's she up to?
What I am up to right now, this very second, is I also launched a podcast called Detention, and it is a play on words. It's exactly what it means. I am that person who has always been a disruptor. So I made a space for disruptors and rebels to have conversations about how we can interrupt what's happening in education, but to also have audacious conversations about what's occurring. Because what I found is that when we're in education, we are so tunnel vision, just trying to get through the day, that we don't understand what's really happening in the system, which, I have been blessed as a school leader to really see the nuances that come from administration as well as what's required in the classroom. I also do coaching. So I do individual coaching, and I have a rec room, which is the redefining education cohort, where I bring women of color together to do an 8-week program in which they learn strategies to not just navigate their positions and be able to be effective in their jobs in terms of supporting their schools, their staff, but also how do they engage in self-care practices, because that's pivotal for sustainability. And then I also do consulting. So I do consulting right now with a district in Dallas, Texas, and I really like that work as well. So I'm still in education, just in a different way. And I want to just bring it back to what you said about the investment. I want folks to understand this. As long as you say, I don't have the money, you'll never feel like you'll have the money. But if you buy lunch, if you buy coffee, if you buy a new pair of shoes, all of these things, and people may say, well, it's not the same. It is the same. What you prioritize and are willing to invest in will always have a return on whatever that investment is. I had to start therapy. So the Department of Education cut me off while I was on medical leave. Okay. I just want y'all to know, I went from 6 figures to absolutely nothing. And my daughter was in college, and I had a mortgage that I was paying in Atlanta, rent I was paying in New York, car note, all of these things. They did not care that financially I had no other recourse, right? So you want me to help people who are in poverty through education, but y'all are literally putting me in the poorhouse, okay? I paid for a therapist. My therapist, every session was let's say her rate is $125, right? I paid her extra because she literally would sit with me for 2.5 hours, 3 hours sometimes. I'm going to pay you what you're worth. So I paid her whatever it was required. Every 2 weeks, I paid for my meditation. I paid for my yoga class. I paid for a personal coach. The personal coach, that's not cheap. You pay thousands of dollars. But in order for me to get well, mentally, physically, and emotionally, in order for me to start preparing for what would be next and realizing, because I needed someone to believe in me just like I believed in the kids. And that's what my coach was for me to start thinking beyond just being a school leader and this is where education begins and ends. I needed to invest in that. So the day I resigned, I didn't necessarily have the written plan of what am I going to do next, but I was more prepared because at least I had my health, and that was the most important thing to me. And I was in a position to start writing out what I wanted to do next. And so I want everyone who's listening to understand that invest in yourself. It is the best thing you could ever do, because the entity that you are loyal to, they will find someone else. And it's the hardest thing to ever hear and accept, because you don't go into this position thinking that someone else will fill your shoes. But I almost died. And I want people to be clear. I almost died. I don't necessarily want to say loyal, but doing my job. And when I needed the Department of Education the most, to cut me off from my insurance and to cut me off from my pay was an indication of what value they felt I had for them. And so I don't want people leaving the profession and being like, that's it, I'm done. No, I want you to understand that you got to take care of yourself. You got to take care of you. You have to choose you. You have to decide that I need to be equipped the same way we're equipping kids for them to be great outside and do all the great things in the world. You got to do that for yourself. You can't unlock doors for children through education and you're keeping yourself closed in. That's not what we're here for. So just please make sure that you become the priority.
Wow. That is such a powerful place to end the pod. Nadia, thank you, girl.
You're welcome.
It's been such an honor and a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I can't wait to see you. We have to make it happen. We have to make it happen. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to the Teach Middle East podcast. Visit our website, teachmiddleeast.com, and follow us on social media. The links are in the show notes.